The human from a dungeon, so, what do you suppose it is? I dunno. It looks kinda like an elf. But the ears are weirdly round, and it has body hair. Yeah, can't be an elf. Maybe it's a tall dwarf. No. Not enough body hair to be dwarven. Plus, I've never heard of a dwarf over 4 feet tall. Yeah, me neither. Don't they all have beards? Pretty sure. These voices sounded strange to me. Like they're speaking my language, but in a weird accent or something. And the voices were heavy? No, that's not the term. Rumbling? Why's it so hard to think? A gnome? No. Gnomes are just short elves. It could be some sort of weird pig kobold thing. Oh yeah. Wait, that still doesn't explain the round ears. Plus the face is all wrong. Look, the nose is too pointy. Am I asleep? Dreaming? What are they talking about? The last thing I remember was going to the hospital to see my girlfriend. Did I get hurt along the way? Are these people doctors? I'm not in any pain, though. But I can't open my eyes. Why can't I open my eyes? What happened to me? I wonder if it can talk. Where'd you find this thing, anyway? You remember that wall collapse in the dungeon? My team and I were exploring that and we got separated. Next thing I know, I find this thing on some sort of weird-looking table. It had a bunch of writing on it, but, well, you know, yeah, you have trouble reading. That's alright. Go on, right. Well, I figured that I'd have a hell of a time trying to find my way back there, so I decided to take it with me. Once I picked it up, a lot of light started shining and suddenly I was at the dungeon entrance. Teleportation? Yeah, probably, huh? That's interesting. You know, since you found it in our dungeon, it might be an orc. Boisterous laughter. It reminds me of my old karate instructor. He used to laugh like that all the time, even when nobody was joking. I wonder what happened to him. I wonder what happened to me. I think I visited my girlfriend. The love of my life, Cassandra. She wasn't in pain today, but the cancer's getting worse. Her formerly luscious blonde hair that went all the way down to her waist was now patchy and wiry from the chemo. Her stunning blue eyes still had their kindness and humor, but betrayed the pain that she was desperately trying to hide. She looked kind of like a skeleton with skin now, but she joked that maybe she can finally be a model. She's still my Cass. I stayed with her until she fell asleep. Then I started to head home. I had to study, because even with everything going on, they were still making me take finals. The bastards know that Cass is sick, but they don't care. State requirements for graduation or whatever. Pisses me off. Fuck them, I want to drop out and get a job, but Cass won't hear of it. Neither will Mom. Dad understands, and says he'd do the same, but he'd like me to respect the wishes of Mom and Cass. How am I supposed to study with the thought of losing her looming over my head, though? How can I think of anything else? There's no way this thing's an orc. It's too small. Plus the ears, yeah. I feel like you're hyperfixated on the ears. Hyper now? Fixated. You're focusing too much on the ears. Well, they're weird though. Have you ever heard of anything that has round ears? Not off the top of my head, but I'm sure there's something. After all, we're looking at round ears right now. Round ears? What does that have to do with anything? Whatever, nothing to do with me. What happened after I started to walk home? I stopped by a gas station and grabbed some chips and a soda to lighten my spirits, and the last thing I remember is crossing the street? There were horns and screeching and then huge lights? Pain. I felt pain. All over my body. And then nothing. Did I get hit by a truck? I wish we could ask it what it is. Well, I could cast healing magic on it. See if that wakes it up. You think Chief would be okay with that? He'll probably want to see it first, right? I won't tell if you don't. We'll just say that it woke up on its own. Alright, deal, awesome. Keep a hand on your axe, just in case. Ready, lay Ronum psack. A pleasant warmth began to spread throughout my body. Like getting a massage from a million fingers all at once. My grogginess began to ebb, and I opened my eyes. Things were blurry at first, but I was soon able to focus on the wooden ceiling. I don't know this ceiling. Wait, wooden ceiling? What kind of building has a wooden ceiling? A barn. I sat up and looked around. The furniture in the room looked like it came straight out of a medieval movie, but a bad one that didn't pay attention to details. I was on a bed with woven sheets and a blanket, for one thing. For another, there were metal handles on some of the furniture. That wasn't a thing in medieval times, right? Then the two people who were talking earlier caught my eye. Cosplayers? How'd they manage to look so big? One was wearing metallic armored pants and no top, showing off its rippling muscles. It looked as if it were scared of me. And it was holding a large serrated axe at its side. The other one was wearing a robe and carrying a staff with some sort of metal ball at the top. All of these details about their appearances were striking, but the most striking thing was that they were both green. Green, pointy ears, and huge. Even hunched over, the robed one with the staff was probably 6 feet 5 inches. The one with the axe was pushing 6 feet 10 inches. The one with the staff grinned and showed a mouth full of very pointy teeth. Like an alligator's. Whoa, careful there. You just woke up. Don't want you falling over, it said. The words sounded weird. As if I weren't hearing them right. No, that's not it. The mouth movements are weird. It's like they're saying something else, but it's dubbed over, with a hint of the original audio left in. Where am I? Who are you? What are you? I asked, trying not to panic. My mouth felt weird when I spoke. Like I'm saying the words that I'm saying, but my mouth was moving differently. Like trying to make a t sound, but making a k sound instead. There was something else that was strange as well, but I couldn't figure it out. I'm Yelk, the grinning one said. This is my brother, Nash. We're orcs. Yup, nice to meet ya. You're in Naliva, a temporary orc settlement that's right outside of the Delver's dungeon. We're hoping to make it a village someday, Nash said, taking his hand off his axe and crossing his arms. Orc? I asked, getting used to the weird talking. Yes, Yelk said. We're orcs. Now that we've answered your questions, I'd like to ask you one. Ask me a question? I asked. What are you? Nash interrupted impatiently. I sat stunned for a moment. Orcs are real? And what do they mean? What am I? I looked at my hands, the same ones I've always had. Even with the same scar I got as a kid, though the scar was looking a bit smaller now. I noticed I didn't have my shirt on, and I quickly checked under the blanket. Yep, naked. Weird. All of this is weird. What the hell is going on? Nash cleared his throat, patiently waiting for me to answer his question. I'm a human, and my name's Nick. Short for Nicodemus. Nicodemus Liam Smith, I stammered as I pulled the blanket up a little bit more. The two orcs shared a confused glance at each other before looking back to me. What's there to be confused about? Sure, Nicodemus is kind of a rare name, but it's not that rare. Hell, I used to get picked on for it all the time. The secret of Nim is single-handedly the reason that I go by Nick. Yelk turned back to me and asked, what's a human? Huh, what? I asked. I've never heard of a human before, Nash said, scratching his head. What were you doing locked away in the dungeon? What dungeon? What do you mean you've never heard of a human? I asked. Okay, wait, Yelk said. Let's try not to make assumptions here. Let's start at the beginning and get on the same page. Nick, you're a human. We don't know what that is. Nash here found you in a secret room inside the Delver's dungeon. You don't know how you got there? No, the last thing I remember was walking home and I trailed off. Oh, right, what? I think I got hit by a truck. What's a truck? Nash asked. It's like a wagon or something that doesn't need anything to pull it, I said. Oh, we've got those, Nash said. Right, Yelk? Yes. We call them magic arts, but I suspect that they're not the same thing. Magi, carts? Carts pulled with magic? I asked. Yep, both orcs replied in unison. Wait. Wait. Orcs, magic, dungeons, getting hit by a truck. Did I get ice-guyed? Or is this just a hallucination that my dying brain is showing me to protect me from the trauma of getting hit by a truck? I suppose there's nothing I can do about this being a hallucination, so I have to go off the assumption that it's not. Which means finding a way back. Wait, if I got reincarnated or whatever to this place, then maybe Cass did as well. Have you seen any other things like me? I asked. Like others in the dungeon? Any females? They usually have long hair and larger breasts. Oh, so you're a male human? Yelk asked. I kinda guessed, but didn't want to be presumptuous. No, like I said earlier, we haven't seen anything like you before, Nash said. Then he leaned closer to Yelk and asked quietly, what's presumptuous mean? It means not being able to observe what's appropriate or permitted in a social setting, Yelk whispered back. Meanwhile, I was trying not to lose it. Cass is terminally ill with cancer, and I wasn't going to be there for her when she passed. I clenched my jaw and stared at the ceiling as I fought back tears. It's not fair. She doesn't deserve to be alone, and I promised. I promised her that I'd be by her side until the end. I take it that all this comes as a bit of a shock, Yelk said softly. Why yeah. Yeah it does, I replied. Alright, well we'll let you process things. We've got to go tell the chief you're up. And then get yelled at for waking you up, Nash said. We'll send someone in with food and drink in a bit. Wait, I said. Where do I go to, defecate? Nash looked surprised and then pointed to the door opposite the one he and his brother were next to. That's the bathroom. Pull the handle to flush the toilet. Okay, I said, wiping my eyes. The two orcs left the room. Indoor plumbing was unexpected, but I suppose I shouldn't be entirely surprised. There's magic here, and there's no telling what that magic can do. Maybe it can return me to my world in time to be with Cass again. So that I can say goodbye. Or maybe even save her. I owe it to her to try, at least. She's made me happier than any man has a right to be. The room started spinning a little bit, so I laid back down. How did I go from getting hit by a truck to being asleep in a dungeon anyway? And when you get ice-guyed, don't you normally get to talk to a sexy goddess or a pervy old god? Some exposition would have been nice. It finally hit me what else felt weird about this place. The air. It smelt different, tasted weird, and was hotter than it should be. But all of these things weren't necessarily strange. You would get that just by going to a different city. No, what was strange was how it felt on my skin. A tingle that felt like it should be giving me goosebumps, but wasn't. Very odd. The door to the room opened and a short orc, still about 5 feet 9 inches or so, entered holding a plate full of meat with a cup of something on it. Her green skin was slightly paler than the other two orcs, and she had an air of grace surrounding her that defied expectations. Like meeting a princess in a bandit camp, what she was wearing definitely wasn't something that royalty would wear. Though. It was an outfit that left little to the imagination. A skin-tight bikini top and very short shorts that exaggerated her ample curves. I tried not to stare, but noticed she was trembling and trying not to look at me as she set the platter down on a table next to my bed. Then she quickly turned and almost ran out of the room. Weird, I said under my breath. I looked at the plate of meat. I guess this confirms that the orcs are carnivorous. I figured that was the case based on the teeth, though. Going to be hard to deal with a meat-only diet, since I'm not a fan of liver. At least they cook it. Would these guys farm? Maybe, for trade or to feed their domesticated animals. I'll have to ask. I took a bite from one of the brown pieces of meat. The tart metallic taste made me grimace a bit. Liver. A necessity for omnivores on a meat-only diet, though. As I chewed the gamey meat, I found myself hoping desperately that they had wild orange trees or something nearby. The white meat was far more palatable, though. It tastes similar to chicken, but not quite. Like a juicier version of quail. I washed it down with the liquid in the cup. Plain old water, but it felt more refreshing than anything I've ever had. I wondered how long I had been unconscious in that dungeon they mentioned. Hopefully not long. I don't even know if time works the same here as it did on my world. There's too much I don't know. I finished the food and suddenly realized how weak and tired I felt. Like I had been running around carrying heavy stuff all day. I was afraid to go back to sleep at first, but then I thought that if I go to sleep, maybe I'll wake up in a proper hospital bed back in my world. Maybe this is just a dream. Maybe I'll be able to see Cass again. I'll do anything to see her again. The Human from a Dungeon Chapter 2, so you two woke it up? Chief Gluern shouted, No sir. I lied, we were simply guessing at what he could be when he woke up all on his own. Yelk lied. We had a short discussion with him, had Catalina grab him some food, and came immediately here to inform you, sir. The chief eyed us suspiciously. He knows we're lying, but he also knows that he can't prove it. Yelk and I will cover each other until our dying breath, and it's not like the Human can tell on us. If the chief can't prove it, he can't openly punish us without people getting mad about injustice. Then he'll have to listen to speech after speech after speech. A much worse punishment than whatever he'd give us. Which means that he'll probably resort to underhanded punishments. I fully expect to be voluntold to do some extra chores this week. A shame, Yelk and I really wanted to go back into the dungeon and look for clues about the Human. Maybe we should have left it alone after all. Smells like bullshit to me. But I'm assuming there's no witnesses? Gluern said as he looked around. After a few shaken heads, he turned back to us. There never are with you two. So, it calls itself a Human, then, sir. And yes, he says he's a Human. Not that it helps, Yelk said, dodging a thrown cup. Don't correct me, sorcerer. Gluern shouted, Sir, did the others find anything related to the Human? I asked. Attempting to distract him from his rage, the chief drew a deep breath and said, Actually, no. Your team still hasn't returned. We're sending a rescue party at sunrise. My blood ran cold. Blun, Graz, Inoris, and Rezgal were pretty tough guys. Almost as tough as me. Party wipes weren't exactly uncommon, but they don't happen to adventurers over level 5 very often. Those 4 are level 7, so they should be able to handle just about anything. What the hell's going on? I'd like to join the rescuers, I said. Me too, sir, Yelk added. I'm afraid not, Gluern said, no longer angry. You're both underleveled for the rescue party. Since they're over level 5, we're sending the over 10s. You'll be liabilities. I gnashed my teeth in frustration, but Chief isn't wrong. Reaching level 10 is an enormous accomplishment, and the difference in power between a level 9 and 10 is extreme. The downside to reaching that rank was all of the extra responsibility that came with it. Most over 10s go into mercenary work, leaving their homes behind. If they don't, They'll quickly get swamped with work that the other adventurers can't handle, aren't they busy? Yelk asked. Alern and Kurosaka accomplished their task in the wastes, and they're back. Renu and Pakin haven't been doing much, as there aren't many wounded. 2 medics, a tank, and a rogue. The perfect rescue party, Gluren replied with a grin. Pakin isn't a medic, she's a necromancer, I replied with distaste. That's just a late medic, if you think about it, Yelk said cheerily. Plus she knows combat magic as well. Yeah, well she'd better be on time, I grumbled. Blue knows me a drink, and zombies don't pay their debts, do skeletons? Yelk asked, how the hell should I know? Well, how do you know that zombies don't, then? Enough, shouted the chief. The matter of the rescue party is settled. The only matter I have left to discuss with you is your next task, Yelk and I stared at the grinning chief, with stalwart expressions. We knew he wouldn't dare officially punish us, but there was a certain level of unease regarding the underhanded task he would give us. He won't be sending us into the dungeon, he knows we'll join the rescue party. There's a possibility that he'll send us into the wastes on retrieval duty, though. The damned herbs that go into medi potions love that sandy shithole. You'll guard the human until I say otherwise. One set of eyes on it at all times, Gluren said, chuckling as my face fell. I'll leave it up to you to decide the shifts. If you wander off, I'll have your hides, dibs on first shift. Yelk shouted unexpectedly. I turned to my brother and was shocked to see him nearly bouncing with excitement. Guard duty is the most boring task available, and just about any orc worth their salt will do anything to avoid it. I looked back to the chief, who shared my expression of shock. Why are you so excited? I asked. No reason. Yelk said, suddenly nervous. Let's go. He grabbed me and began dragging me out of the room, just as the chief was having second thoughts about our new assignment. I struggled a bit, but Yelk has a remarkably tight grip for a sorcerer. I watched the chief shrug as we left the room. What the hell's got into you? I asked as I finally shook his grip. Nash. We get to study the human. Yelk said, actually bouncing up and down this time. We might be the only ones who've ever met one. Okay, I said with a sigh. I see your point. It is kinda cool, I can't wait. I wonder if he has any magic resistances. That pink skin it has doesn't look like it's any tougher than ours. Be careful, brother, I cautioned. I wasn't able to tell if he heard my warning or not because he immediately started mumbling to himself and walking towards the hospital. I sighed as I followed after him. He'd always been like this. Something strikes his fancy, and he becomes unable to think of anything else until he's figured it out. Even if the chief hadn't tasked us with guard duty, Yelk probably would have ended up hanging around the human's room. Hey, Nash. Wait up, a familiar voice called out to me. I turned and saw a larger-than-life figure wearing full black and plate armor and carrying a sword that was nearly as long as I am tall. I grabbed Yelk's arm to stop him from wandering off and nodded at the figure as it approached. Hello Alern, I hope the day finds you well. What can I do for you? I asked him. I wanted to ask you about the rescue mission, Alern replied. Would you mind answering a few questions for us? I have apprised him of the likelihood that you know nothing other than what we've already been told, a voice said from behind me. I suppressed my urge to swing around. No need to. I already knew who it was. There isn't anyone else in the village that could sneak up on me. And he did so as often as he could. Hello Kurosaka, I said as I calmly turned to face him. Kurosaka is shorter than most orcs, but nobody has pointed that out to him since he was a child. There was a coldness in his eyes that would unnerve a drake. He's only a rogue in the sense that he knows how to avoid traps and pass through locks. His specialty in combat is quick, silent movement and striking vital areas with enough force to obliterate plate armor. The reason that everyone confuses his class is that he's the only shadow warrior in the village, and he doesn't bother correcting people who get it wrong. I glanced at his short swords. I prefer an axe, but I wouldn't complain if I had to use those babies. They were simple, but elegant, double-edged, with an exaggerated point and pommels designed after the sun and the moon. Kurosaka had received them as a reward for saving a wealthy elven family in the wastes. How much? I asked. They are still not for sale. They shall never be for sale. Stop asking, Kurosaka replied tersely. I'll give you 20 gold. 10 each, I said. You do not have 20 gold, he countered. I'll borrow it and pay it off by killing things in the dungeons with those swords. No, you shall not, because I will not be selling them. Pardon me, Alern interrupted. Time is of the essence. Nash, your party went to explore the part of the dungeon that was revealed by the collapsed wall. You were gone for a day before you exited. Did you encounter any enemies? No, I sighed. We didn't even see any traces of monster activity. It was eerily quiet. How, then, did you become separated? Kurosaka asked, annoyed that he'd been wrong. Or that I kept looking at his swords. The strap on my pack came loose, and I stopped to fix it. They didn't want to stop, so they kept going. I explained. I fixed my pack and ran after them, but there was a fork in the path. There weren't any footprints or markers, and I decided to go left, but I guess they went right. I ended up in a sort of labyrinth, and that's when I found the human. Human? Alern asked. Oh, the thing you found in the dungeon. How do you know what it's called? It woke up. Yulk said excitedly. I see, Alern stuttered, caught off guard by Yulk's demeanor. Well. Nash, did you see or hear anything odd on your way out? Any clue to what might have kept them from returning? When I picked up the human, I was teleported to the entrance of the dungeon with it still in my arms. I didn't even know the rest of the team was still in there until Chief told me just a few minutes ago. I said. It's been a couple days. They definitely should have been back by now, I understand. We'll find them, Nash. Don't worry too much, Alern said. Let us begin our rescue, Kurosaka said. Alern nodded and they went on their way. Yulk and I continued on our way to guard the human. When we entered the hospital building, there were 3 girls peeking through the door into the human's room. Maybe the chief had a point assigning us as guards. What are you doing? I asked. The girls jumped back, falling over each other in the process. The first girl who managed to stand back up was Catalina, the one we'd asked to bring food to the human. We're just curious, she said. Yeah, Yini said from the ground. We wanted to see the new pet. Pets don't talk, Yulk said. Pets are for petting, that's why they're called pets. Yini scowled for a moment before she realized it was Yulk that was talking to her. Then her face softened. It's obvious to everyone except Yulk that Yini fancies him. My brother is smart, but he's dumb in his own way. You're right, it's so cute. Nemora interrupted. Are you sure you found it in the dungeon? Yes, I'm sure, I said sternly. And because of that, it may be dangerous. Keep your distance, we can handle ourselves, Catalina said, pretending like she hadn't been cowering when we asked her to feed it. It's pretty small, it's short, but it's also muscular. I get the feeling that it's stronger than it looks. But even if you could fight it, Chief would get mad at you for putting yourselves in the situation to fight it. Especially if you killed it before we found out more about it, I replied. Yeah. Is it some kind of elf? Yini asked. Maybe, but it calls itself a human, Yulk replied excitedly. It may be an offshoot species of elf. Or maybe an ancestor of the elves. We don't know how long it was in that dungeon for. Did it eat? I asked. Why yes. I'm pretty sure. The platter looks empty, Catalina said, so you didn't retrieve the platter? I asked smugly, and no. It's sleeping. I didn't want to wake it up, she replied defensively, damn it all. Sleeping again, Yelk said with disappointment. Oh well, at least that confirms it's carnivorous like us, and not herbivorous like the elves, so maybe it's not related to the elves? Yini asked. Maybe not. Maybe it's related to orcs. We did find it in the orc dungeon, after all, I found it. Stop trying to take credit for my find, I said teasingly, yes. You found it. Anyways, if it's an ancestor of the orcs, then it's probably much stronger than it looks. So Nash is right, you three should be careful, Yelk said. The three girls looked crestfallen. Hearing it from me was one thing. I'm a bit dumb, so they don't think I know what I'm talking about. They always listen to Yelk, though. He's probably the smartest orc in the village, even though he's dumb when it comes to women. Poor Yini, she's got an uphill battle in the fight for his affection. Okay, Yini finally said. We'll go. Sorry, no need for apologies if you don't do it again, Yelk said cheerily. Plus, it'll be safer with Nash and I guarding him, it's a him? Nemora asked. Don't even think about it, I told her. I'm not, she said. Then how'd you know what I'm talking about? I asked. Shut up, Nemora always had an eye for odd ones. She frequently flirts with the non-orc traders that pass through. They politely flirt back, but not a single one of them will ever take her up on the offer. It's not very common for other species to interbreed, at least in my experience, but orcs cannot breed with other species. Trying to can be fatal. Well, we should get back to our duties, Catalina said. Agreed, I replied tersely. The girls left, and we entered the room quietly. I checked the platter. The human had ate and drank everything on offer. I took a moment to study his features. He had a few scars on his face, which was kind of cool. His black hair was cut short in a way I'd never seen before. If I had to guess his height, I'd say somewhere around 5 feet 10 inches. About as short as the girls, but something about him told me that he's like Kurisaka. I can't quite put my finger on why, but I feel like he's dangerous. The human from a dungeon chapter 3, what do you mean you don't want to go to college? Cass asks. I run my hand through her silky hair and reply, I don't want to do anything. Not without you. Well, I can probably get into any school that you get into. Or we can do long distance, if you can wait for me, she says with a smile. Of course I can, but... I say, trying to remember what the problem was. Okay, yeah, I guess I'll go to college. Local, though, I don't think I can take a day without seeing you, she smiles as she takes a sip of her coffee. We're on my porch, pretending to be adults by sipping on instant cappuccino. She takes hers with milk, almost half the cup full. I smile at her coffee-flavored milk. Our eyes meet. They glow bright with life. Not like what, so did you pass your finals? I haven't taken them yet, I say. But don't worry, I'll pass them. The only class that will give me any trouble is... I trailed off as I noticed the color of the sky is the same as her eyes. Not similar, the exact same. Her eyes are beautiful, but not a normal sky color. The blue is too dark for this time of day. I look around. Why is the gas station across the street? What's going on? Translator module functioning, she says. Maintenance required, what? I ask. Biology, she says. That's the class that gives you trouble, right? Or is it anatomy and physiology? Oh, it's anatomy and physiology. The school got the gym teacher to do it, I reply. And he's bad at it. I look around again. We're not on my porch, we're in the road. Hey, are we supposed to be here? I ask. Of course, baby, she replies. This is where it happens, where what happens, a thunderous crack rings out and the sky turns dark green in the blink of an eye. I panic and try to grab her hand. No one's there. I'm alone in the middle of the road. Where did she go? User interface non-functional. Interdimensional energy adapter functional. Personality matrix non-functional. Where's that voice coming from? What the hell is happening? Nanomechanical interface non-functional. So you think he's an orc? My eyes snap open to see a wooden ceiling. I know this ceiling. Damn it. What was that dream? I sit up and see the two orcs staring at me. Nash and Yolk, brothers. Nash was giving me a glare of suspicion. But Yolk was looking at me eagerly. Like a child looking at Christmas presents. I'm not an orc, I said. I'm a human. No, I don't think you're an orc, Nick, Yolk said with a grin. I think you might be an ancestor of the orcs. What? Why would you think that? I asked. Well, look at the facts. You eat what we eat, you were found in our dungeon, and we are roughly the same shape. You're a bit smaller, but that's evolution for you, but I came from another world, Yolk. We don't have magic where I come from. You can't have evolved from humans unless we came from here, I said while stretching. Also, I don't just eat what you eat. I also eat fruits and vegetables. I'll be okay if you keep giving me liver. But I'm not sure what the health effects long term will be. There was a period of silence. Both orcs looked shocked at what I had just said. I thought we had discussed that I came from another world earlier, but thinking back I might not have made it clear. I remember telling them about trucks, but maybe I forgot to tell them we didn't have magic. You can eat vegetables? Nash asked, his hand resting on his axe. Yeah, why? The only species that can eat plants and meat that I know of is puppers, Yolk said. Even then, they either eat meat or eat plants depending on the teeth they're born with. Everything else is either carnivorous or herbivorous. My turn to be shocked. This can't be real, carnivores and herbivores rule this world? But the evolutionary advantage that being an omnivore grants is so massive. How did this happen? Yep, carnivorous or herbivorous. What do you even call something that eats both? Nash asked. Omnivorous, I replied. That's further proof that I come from another world. Being omnivorous isn't all that rare where I come from. Omnivorous, Yolk mumbled. I see. All-consuming. So your kind eats all the plants and animals? Pretty much, but we domesticate animals and farm plants. Plus we're not voracious eaters. Well, not all of us, I said with a smile. I'll be damned, look at his teeth. Nash explained, yes. They look like a mix of elf and orc teeth. How exciting. Maybe you're the ancestor of both elves and orcs. Yolk said as he started bouncing, except that doesn't make any sense. Evolution rarely takes a step backwards. Being an omnivore is much more advantageous than being either an herbivore or a carnivore, I pointed out. I don't see how, Nash said. If you've got to eat both plants and meat. What do you do when you don't have one or the other? That's a good question, Yolk said. We can eat either or. I can be on a meat-only diet or on a vegetable-only diet for an extended period of time, I explained. In my world there's people, humans who don't eat meat and humans who don't eat vegetables. But they take supplements to even out their nutrients. I chuckled to myself about the unexpected usage of my AP Health class. I hadn't known exactly what I wanted to do for a career, but I was leaning toward the medical profession. The funny thing is that my teacher posed the specific problem of being trapped in a meat-only environment or a plant-only environment as one of test essays. Okay, so you're fine for now, but we should be looking out for plants you can eat, Nash said. Yes, please. Most fruits should be okay if herbivores eat them, I said. Then a thought occurred to me. Wait, maybe not. I might end up being allergic to some of the plants here. Ah yes, rashes, sneezes, and diarrhea. And maybe sudden death. Yelk exclaimed. Don't worry, most allergies can be treated with magical healing. We've already determined that the healing works on you, so you don't have to worry about being cautious with food. Well, as long as you're near me, oh, that's a relief. I was trying to remember how allergy tests worked. Healing magic sounds pretty handy. I wonder if it's replaced doctors. If magic users are common and they can all do healing, probably. Hey, wait a minute, what do you mean you've determined that healing magic works on me? I asked. Yelk smiled wide and said, it's how we. Nash moved faster than I'd ever seen anyone move and clasped a hand over Yelk's mouth. Yelk's eyes went wild and for a second he looked like he was going to attack Nash. But then he calmed down and nodded. Nash released his brother and looked at me. Don't worry about it, he said. I was stunned for a moment, but then guessed that I shouldn't push it. They probably used healing magic on me at some point. As far as why they didn't want to admit it, I could only guess. I looked at my hand again. The scar there had shrank, I wasn't just imagining it. That's a bit of a relief. How common is healing magic? I asked. Not very. It requires a few different things to happen for it to work properly. First, you have to be able to use magic. Not everyone can. I don't know what it's like for other races, but only about a third of our people can use it, Yelk explained. Next, you have to be able to conceptualize what the magic does. This means that you have to be able to somehow visualize the mending process of a wound. This grants you access to the healing spell, which you can use on anything you want. Finally, you have to have enough mana for the spell to heal the wound. If not, you'll pass out. Wait, so if I had a broken arm you'd have to visualize my bone mending to be able to heal it? I asked. No, the spell works on anything once you gain the visualization. If you can visualize the mending process on skin, that will unlock the spell for you. Then you can use it on a broken arm while having no idea how the bone heals. There are people with large amounts of mana who can't visualize for shit, explained Nash. They have to have it happen to them before they can create a mental picture of it, so they usually end up with physical enhancement spells and find work as warriors. So, the better your imagination, the more powerful of a mage you can be? I asked. Partly. But it's mostly your knowledge of a certain subject. For instance, if you know how fire works but don't have much imagination, you'll be able to unlock middle-tier fire spells. If you have a great imagination but a limited knowledge of fire, same thing. If you have both intimate knowledge of how fire forms and a great imagination, you will unlock the highest tier of fire magic, Yelk said. Same with any other spell. So I probably couldn't summon a dragon, then? Nash laughed and said, you could if you made it a pet and then trained it to come when you whistle. But with magic, no. People have pet dragons? I asked with a laugh. A couple of legendary heroes have been known to have dragon companions. There was a king about 300 years back who had a bunch of pet dragons. Got a breeding pair and helped raise the young dragons. Had something like 15 of them, Nash replied. What happened to them? It was 17, and when he died they ran amok. Destroyed his kingdom and started in on other kingdoms before they were finally defeated. About 12 of them were killed, the rest went to live in the wilderness somewhere. They're probably still alive, Yelk answered. Still alive? I asked with shock in my voice. Yeah, dragons don't die of old age. Or at least, nobody has ever seen it happen. There's a dragon that's been living with elves for over 1200 years now, Nash said. It doesn't do much, though. It's been at least 100 years since it went to sleep. The elves might have moved in after it fell asleep and built around it, Yelk said. No, they tamed the beast. This is known historical fact. I stayed silent as the brothers argued. magic, dragons, elves, and orcs. I had definitely been transported to a fantasy realm. How? That's anyone's guess. Several feelings rushed through me at once. Excitement that I was in a magical new place to explore. Sadness at being away from Cass. Shame of my excitement. Setting those aside, I still had many questions. The most burning one, though, do you think I could learn magic? I asked, interrupting the argument. Silence echoed through the room. The two brothers shared a look and then turned back to me. There was a long pause before Yulk finally spoke. Possibly. But not now. There's things going on that demands the chief's attention, and you aren't allowed to wander until he gives you his permission to. You're actually deeper within our village than most non-orcs are allowed, Nash explained. That's because you came from the dungeon. I don't know how the chief is going to approach this, and there may be a lot of legal things that he will need to decide upon. For instance, you were in the dungeon since before we orcs claimed it. Which means you might have a legal claim to the dungeon. I doubt that, Yulk said. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to enter it, not necessarily. Since he was already inside, the barrier may have counted it as an open invitation sort of thing. If that were the case, then the rest of your party would have been teleported out when he was carried out of the dungeon. Even if that weren't the case, the rescue party wouldn't have been able to go in after them. No, it's definitely an orc dungeon. What do you mean by orc dungeon? I asked. And what's this legal claim stuff? Well, you have to pay to claim a dungeon, and you can claim it for either your species or your faction. Most claim dungeons for a species, because the loot changes based on who the claim is for. For instance, if you claim it for a kingdom, most of the loot is going to be food or wood or things like that. Claiming for a species can grant magical items and weapons. Though, Yulk explained. Claiming for an adventuring faction grants the best loot, but then only people from that faction could use the dungeon. Which is a dangerous thing, politically. So kingdoms, which are the only ones who can afford the cost, usually claim for species. Yep, and the Delver's dungeon is an orc dungeon. Probably, Nash said. Anyway, the chief has a lot of things on his plate at the moment. So you won't be going anywhere for a while. And neither will we. Why did your party need to be rescued? I asked Nash. We got separated. I found you, instead of them. I decided to take you with me, and when I picked you up I was teleported to the dungeon entrance. We had gone a long ways inside, so I opted to carry you out and report instead of finding the others, Nash said with a hint of shame. So they're still trapped in the dungeon? We don't know if they're trapped, or even in trouble. But it's been days, and they should have been back by now. Yulk explained. So the chief decided to send some overtens in after them. Overtens? I asked. Adventurers that are over skill level 10, Nash replied. Level? The orcs once again shared a look. Yulk shrugged. Even more proof you're from another world. Damn, I was hoping that you were an orc ancestor, or something, he said. The Kuragard determines levels. When you register as an adventurer, through a church, guild, or governmental organization, a link is formed between you and the Kuragard. The Kuragard assesses your skills, spells, and strengths and assigns you a level that is shared with all participating organizations. This level determines what kind of jobs you can accept. And gives you an idea of where you stack up against other adventurers, Nash explained. Does the Kuragard give you skills or anything? I asked. No, Yulk said. You get skills and strength through training and practical application. You get spells through study and practice. The Kuragard just keeps track. A soft knock at the door interrupted my interrogation of the orcs. The door opened to reveal the cute orc girl carrying another platter of food and drink. She avoided meeting eyes with me and delicately set down the new platter. As she left the room, a different sort of question came to me. How long was I asleep this time? I asked. 2 days, Nash replied, as the revelation that I had slept for 2 whole days dawned on me. So did the smell of the meat. The hunger that had previously gone unnoticed suddenly announced itself in the form of my stomach growling. The two orcs chuckled as I began to eat and drink. The front teeth appeared to be narrow at the tips to cut through food items, and the teeth next to them look like they rip apart sections of the meat quite nicely. Fascinating, Yelk said. Pwesh danek shaman mi will iet. I said through a mouthful of liver. Ich embarrashin, don't mind me, human. I'm just trying to non-invasively determine more about your origin. Better than the alternative, I would think, the orc said with a slightly malicious smile. I gulped down the gamey meat as the implication of what he said hit home. It hadn't occurred to me earlier, but Yelk definitely fit the profile of a mad scientist who would vivisect me if given half the chance. I didn't take very long to think of my response. Fine. Look but don't touch, please, I said. Yelk frowned mockingly, and Nash laughed. I picked up my drink to wash down the aftertaste of my meal as the door to the room burst open. Nash. The rescue party's back. A different orc girl exclaimed. The chief wants you to bring the human. Nash rose from his seat on the bed opposite mine and looked down at me, suddenly serious. He tossed some clothes at me, and I caught them. A shirt and pants, again woven instead of made from hide. Not exactly medieval, but similar in style. I met his gaze. Get dressed, and let's go, he said. The human from a dungeon chapter 4. Been a while since I was last in the dungeon, Alern said as we reached the collapsed wall. Same. Not since I reached level 9, Rerna replied. I was in here last year, Packin the Vile added. I remained silent. Why would it matter how long it had been? The dungeon changes frequently, passageways shifting and sliding to reveal new threats and rewards. Monster materials, magic cores, gems, precious metals, and even weapons and armor were all up for grabs by those who had the tenacity to brave the depths. Woe be to any who became complacent and assured of victory, though. The dungeon you entered yesterday may very well not be the same dungeon you enter today. Rookie adventurers that learned this fact about dungeons were terrified of being present within the dungeon when the changes took place. It's a natural fear. Being deep within the dungeon with no hope of return would end only in a terrible death. Their fears are allayed when they learn that the dungeon forcefully teleports those within to its entrance when it begins to change. It was for this reason that Alern and I had been opposed to waiting until the morning to enter the dungeon. If the dungeon had shifted in such a way as to block the passage, we would never know what happened to the lost party if they weren't teleported to the entrance. We would only know that they had died. The chief had forced us to wait, though. To make certain we were properly supplied and to give the lost party one last chance to make it to the entrance, I looked at the pile of bricks that laid on the floor of the dungeon. The mortar had come loose, and the weight of the bricks had pulled this section of wall down, exposing a previously hidden passageway. The passageway was lit by stones that had been inserted into the ceiling and gave off a bright white light. It struck me as odd and out of place. Magical stones that gave off light were not cheap. But these were installed every 20 bricks, and provided enough light that one would swear a window were nearby. It was far brighter than the rest of the dungeon, and indeed even brighter than most buildings I had been in. I had never seen nor heard of anything like it before. Gluern was a fool to send undertens to investigate. This feels wrong, Rerna said as we entered the hall. I can't quite figure out why, though. There is a suspicious lack of dust, I added. Silence fell over the party as they came to the same realization. It had also been the first time I had spoken since we entered the dungeon. I would have been more verbose if our party hadn't included Packin the Vile. One's magic tells tales of one's mind, and necromancy was evidence of a twisted mind. She had gained renown by making herself useful to the village, and many believed her to be a valuable adventurer. But I knew the truth. I knew of her sojourns to the wastes, to find corpses, to experiment on. I had watched as she revived her former comrades as mindless husks, to fight her battles for her. I had seen her disregard them after those battles, without a second thought. Her magic told a tale of egomania and narcissism, but she masked it well with strategically utilized friendliness and kindness. She was with us only because she was also skilled with offensive and healing magic. Her zombies are much weaker than the bodies that supplied them. So her necromancy would be useless in the rescue of adventurers over level 5. Or the pacification of monsters that could kill those adventurers. This is the fork that Nash mentioned. He went left, so they probably went right, Alern said. See, Kurosaka? It wasn't a waste of time to interview him after all. A rare occurrence indeed, for it not to be a waste of time to speak with Nash, I replied. Chuckles came from the rest of the party. Nash was well known for being rambunctious and annoying. When paired with his brother, he became conniving as well. The Alta brothers were troublemakers, of this there was no doubt. Still, their antics brought about good humors most of the time. I was glad that they weren't a part of this rescue team. I have a foreboding feeling about what's to come. We followed the passage, without incident until we came upon sheer and utter darkness. The next part of the passage seemed to be lacking the stones that lit the rest of it. The other party members activated their various lighting mechanisms. The 2 magic users created small balls of light, and Alern activated his own magical stone inlay on his armor's pauldron. These lights were bright enough to allow us to see that the rest of the passage looked much like that which we had already traveled. I did not activate any lights of my own. The shadows are my allies, and by shunning them I would weaken my combat effectiveness. This darkness nearly set me at ease, for it was far more natural for a dungeon to be dark than for it to be well lit. Do you think a collapse might have prevented their return? Rarnu asked. It's possible, Alern responded. I hope that's the case. Any other reason for delay would be unfortunate, Pakin the Vile added. I remained silent as we continued on. Like the party we were sent to rescue, we had been traveling for about a day. A sudden sense of dread came over me. What if the reason that Nash had teleported hadn't been picking up the human? What if it had been because the dungeon was shifting, and the discovery of the human had been coincidental? Then the reason that the rest of the party hadn't been teleported as well would be that they were dead. I opted to keep this line of thought to myself. Nothing good could come of voicing my concerns, and the rest of this party likely had come to the same conclusion. It wouldn't change what we had to do. We had to find the lost party and determine their fate. If it is a collapse, they'd stay nearby the blocked portion of the passage, Alern said, so we just have to find the collapse and dig them out. Easy, Rarnu said. Do you think we'll have to share our food? No, they should have enough. They would have brought 7 days' worth of rations. It's only been 4, Pakin the Vile said. Pakin's right, Alern chimed in. There's no reason to worry about them going hungry. Alern cut his sentence short as a soft sound began emanating from ahead of us, just out of sight. We stopped and listened to the squelching and crunching. Our gazes met. It was a sound that we were all familiar with. The sound of a predator eating its prey. We quietly armed ourselves and continued forward slowly and with steady feet. As we crept down the passageway, I noted that the lights hadn't been missing at all. They had been slashed and rendered ineffective. I quietly pointed this out to the rest of the party. We spent a moment quietly guessing to ourselves if the slashing had been done by blade or claw. Then we continued moving, following both the passage and the unnerving sounds of consumption. The passage soon opened into a spacious chamber, held up by smooth, brown pillars. The floor and walls were also brown. The light glinted off of something metallic on the floor. I gestured for my fellows to halt and edged closer to get a better look at the object. the squelching and crunching getting louder with each step. What I saw, I could barely make sense of. My confused eyes studied the object until realization made my blood run cold. It was a piece of breastplate, shorn cleanly just above the pectoral guards. The metal of the breastplate was thick, but the cut was smooth. As if someone had taken scissors to a piece of cloth. Whatever had done this was unbelievably powerful or sharp. Or both. I looked at Alern, realizing that his armor would likely only be a hindrance in the coming fight. Our eyes met, and by his steely gaze I could tell he had realized it as well. We continued further into the chamber, and I glanced around for signs of the enemy. I noticed patches of white on the ground, walls, and pillars. I looked closer and realized that the room had originally been white, and with a sniff I came to the conclusion that the brown staining was from blood. I looked around with horror, the bloodstains covering nearly every inch of the chamber. It was more blood than one orc could possibly provide. The light suddenly shined upon a figure, hunched over with its back to us. Its skin was sickeningly pale, with thin white fur. So thin that the fur was largely absent, with the exception of the creature's crown. The hair upon its head was so abundant that it fell past its shoulders, moving almost hypnotically with the twists and jerks of the beast. These movements aligned with the squelching and crunching, and I soon realized it was holding what was left of an arm. We froze. The horror before us finished its grim meal and turned to face us. Rising as it did so. It was as tall as I was, and stood on two legs just as I did. I looked upon a face that could have been my own, were it not so pale. The only color on this creature were its blackened eyes, sunken into its skull from disuse, and the fresh blood dripping from its maw. From the tips of its stiffened fingers extended long claws, discolored by blood both new and old. They were the size of daggers and almost assuredly just as sharp. I quickly stepped into the shadows as the rest of the party readied themselves to fight the creature. It turned his head to follow my movements, as if it knew where I was without having to see me. It was, smiling at me. "Packen, burn the bastard," shouted Alern. Packen the Vile took a stance and shouted, "On Refni retard tsa." I was barely able to follow what happened. I watched helplessly as the creature moved in one swift motion, closing the distance between itself and Packen and separating her from her head before she could finish her spell. I watched as her face grew confused and then shocked, before it stopped moving entirely. Her body crumpled to the ground, her magical ball of light snuffing out and shrouding the creature in darkness once again. "Run!" I shouted as I charged the creature. My blades met claws, with a sound similar to thunder. The creature was just as strong as I had feared, and it pushed me until my back pressed against the nearest pillar. "Kirasaka!" Alern shouted, hefting his sword to ready a blow. "No! Run! Run now! Go!" I shouted, struggling against the creature's might. "They have to go. They need to warn the chief. The lost party is dead, and any further rescuers will die as well. I'm the best matchup against this creature's strength and speed. They have to realize this." Geo warned them. I screamed as the creature tilted its claws to dig into my shoulder. With pained expressions, they turned and fled. I sent a bone-shattering kick into the knee of the creature. Instead of collapsing as it should have, it merely lost its balance long enough for me to free myself. I ran deeper into the chamber, trying to draw it away from my fleeing comrades. It followed me into the darkness. "Noisiv wodast sack," I said, casting shadow vision just in time to dodge a wild slash from the creature's clawed hand. I counter-slashed and scored a blow on its outer thigh. It didn't go as deep as I had hoped. I slashed and dodged again and again, the creature matching my movements with impossible skill. The macabre smile never left its face. I tapped into every fight I'd ever fought, every training session I'd ever been in, every trick I had learned or seen, trying to find a way to score a decisive blow. The creature managed to dodge most of them. Those that it didn't weren't enough to even give it pause. I'm getting tired. I don't know how long it's been. I hope they managed to get away. It's a fair trade. No, there's no time for melancholy. An opening. I perform a standard double slash with all of my strength, aiming for the creature's exposed neck. The creature slashes at my swords just before the blow hits home in an attempt to block. I use the momentum from the slash to roll and put some distance between us. I hear pieces of metal strike the ground and bounce. I look at my swords and to my horror, I'm only holding the hilts. The creature turns to me, and I cast the broken blades aside and draw my knives. As the beast approaches, I throw one of them as hard as I can, a palpable blow. The knife sinks directly into the creature's eye. It stops dead in its tracks, and I breathe a sigh of relief. Then the creature reaches up to its face and pulls the blade out of its skull, tearing its own eye out with it. The bastard is still smiling, even as its own blackened blood flows down its face. Fuck you. I shout defiantly as I bring my final knife to bear. It charges at me. I barely manage to dodge the strike, slicing into its arm as I do. Another shallow blow, barely enough to draw blood. Curse this vile fiend. It slashes at me once again, but this time it anticipates my dodge and kicks at me as well. I am sent flying, the shock stifling the pain. I slam into a pillar, dropping my knife, but I manage rise fast enough to grab the creature's hands, temporarily preventing it from impaling me. I struggle against its strength, trying to move the claws away from my chest. But the creature is strong, and they inch closer and closer. I stare into its remaining eye with determination. But the claws inch closer and closer. I scream at the beast as I feel the claws pierce my armor, and then my skin, and then my bones, and finally, my scream is cut short as the claws rip into my lungs. I let go of one of the hands and reach for the creature's head, grasping its ear and tearing it off. The creature rears back in pain, pulling its claws from my chest. Too late, though. Even as the creature fills the air with shrieks, I can no longer breathe. The ear falls from my hand to the ground along with my blood. As my vision fades, I see my prize for the first time. I mentally chuckle at the absurdity of the shape of the ear. Whoever heard of a round ear? The human from a dungeon, chapter 5. Nash and I turned around to allow the human to get dressed in privacy. Nash was on edge the entire time that our backs were turned. He must still think the little critter could be a threat. He's not wrong, I suppose. Not the kind of threat that would attack you without a weapon, though. The kind that could outthink and outmaneuver you on a battlefield? Maybe, this human had just awoken and had already demonstrated knowledge of fringe intellectual pursuits like evolution and nutrition. It spoke of things I had spent extensive effort to learn as if they were common knowledge. My younger brother had stumbled onto a goldmine of knowledge. Even if the human didn't have any more knowledge than what he had already displayed. Just studying his anatomy would be revolutionary. He would likely be opposed to vivisection, though. Even with healing magic available, I'm ready, I think, Nick said, my brother, and I turned around to look at the human. He actually cut a dashing figure, if you're into that sort of thing. Trimmed black hair that was longer on the top than on the sides. Dark blue eyes with a hint of green, a chiseled jawline, and musculature that was reminiscent of a fighter. He had a scar to the right of his chin that was barely noticeable, and a much more noticeable scar on his left temple. He could pass as a short elf or a tall dwarf were it not for the ugly round ears. Nash was right, they're very jarring now that I look closer. All right, let's go, Nash replied. We exited the room with the human to my left and Nash to the human's left. The girls were peeking around the corner of the hallway, curious of the human's activities. Yini and Nomura were enamored with the thing, but Catalina seemed afraid of it. I will have to remember to ask her about her reasons for that. Perhaps it's merely a phobia, but she might be able to detect something that I can't about the human. I had no reason to believe the same of Nash, though. My brother was infamously overreactive and overprotective. His near hostility towards the human makes little sense, since he's the one that brought it from the dungeon. I glanced at the human as we walked. It walked very similar to Nash, fully upright with a steady gait. Unlike Nash, it was keeping its eyes ahead and trying to avoid making eye contact with the orcs that quickly shuffled out of our way. As we continued on, I wondered if the human was a warrior or a mage of some sort. Not everyone has to be, of course, there are many who are neither. Most, even. But something told me that the human was special in more than its rarity. I might be setting myself up for disappointment, but I really want to see what it's capable of. I wonder what adventurer level it is. No, wait, it had shown ignorance of magic. While that doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't have martial combat experience, it's unlikely to be above level 2 if it's never heard of magic. Perhaps instructing it on magic would boost its level. Listen, Nick. When we get to the chief's chamber, you need to be quiet unless you're directly asked a question. You're technically an outsider, and you're deeper in our village than an outsider is allowed to be. An outsider meeting the chief in the chamber is unheard of, so if you're rude, there's bound to be bad consequences. Warned Nash, I understand. I'll keep quiet, replied Nick. Oh, I don't think it'll be all that dire, I said. After all, Nash is the reason you're here. If you do anything naughty, he's liable to take the blame. I returned Nash's glare with a malicious grin. A not-so-subtle reminder that all this is his fault. But I'll likely have to remind him that whatever the fate of his team is, he's not to blame for that. They went off on their own volition, and he wasn't even their leader. He was their strongest, but Graz was the leader. And Graz decided to leave their strongest behind and continue on. And the others followed him. If Graz survived, I'm going to give him a good skull-shaking for his stupidity. We entered the chamber and my blood ran cold. Alern and Rurnu stood before the chief, looking ashamed. I didn't waste time wondering where Pakin and Kurasaka were. These two wouldn't be here alone if things had gone well. A boss had been encountered. Nash, I'm sorry, said Gluern. Your party didn't make it. Nash's jaw tightened as the realization hit home. He looked at Alern and Rurnu, and both of them avoided his eyes. He swallowed and nodded at the chief. I reached over and patted his elbow to comfort him. He'd need a drink tonight, Chief, I began. I take it that Kurasaka and Pakin didn't make it either, correct? Was it a boss? We believe so. What are we going to do about it? That's what we're deciding, Gluern said and pointed to the human. I wanted to speak to that to find out more information. Care to introduce us? Allow me, said Nash. We all looked at my brother, not expecting him to be able to speak yet. Perhaps I didn't give him enough credit and he already knew that what happened wasn't his fault. Nash is a great brother, he's full of surprises. Never boring. This is Nicodemus Liam Smith. A human who may have been transported to our world from another world. He goes by Nick, Nash said, gently pushing the human forward. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Nick said, bowing at the waist. Everyone froze for a second. Despite the grim attitude of the meeting, there were a few chuckles. I am not a king, I am a chief. You need not genuflect to me, Gluern said with a chuckle. Need not genuflect? A remarkable increase in vocabulary, I said while jerking my head to the left to dodge a thrown goblet. Don't patronize me, sorcerer! Gluern yelled. The metal goblet clattered behind me. I grinned. Most of the drinking utensils in the village were either made of wood, glass, or ceramic. The chief had tired of having to order replacement cups and had changed all of his utensils to metal. This was much more economical, considering that this type of spat of ours is nearly traditional at this point. I frequently critiqued Gluren for several reasons. The first and foremost reason was that I got amusement from his reactions. The second reason was to remind him that even though he is a chieftain, he is still an orc like the rest of us. It's all too easy to forget a simple fact like that when your word is law. The third reason is to keep my reaction time healthy. I stole a glance at the two surviving members of the rescue party and immediately regretted my shenanigans. Alern, who was normally mountainous, was now staring into the distance as if lost in thought and looking significantly deflated. Rurna was struggling not to cry. Gluren and I met each other's eyes, and I could tell we both felt shame at our outbursts. "I'm sorry," Gluren said to everyone except me. "Nick, I called you here because you were found in the Delver's dungeon around the same area as the beast that will be the topic of discussion. Alern, please describe what happened." At the mention of his name, Alern returned to reality and began his tale. We all listened raptly, especially when he described the creature. Skin nearly as white as its hair with claws like daggers, standing like and as tall as an orc, and with speed that matched a shadow warrior's. The way it moved when it killed Pakin, almost too fast for even an over 10 to see. Very interesting, but in a very dangerous way. Something I would rather read about instead of personally study. Unless it were dead, of course. When we returned to the collapsed portion of the wall, we waited for Kurosaka to catch up, Alern said. But, after waiting for a very long time, we were teleported to the entrance. Without him, every face listening to the story dropped except for Nyx, who looked confused instead. The human looked like he wanted to ask questions, but was hesitating due to our warnings. The dungeon shifts frequently, and when it does it teleports the adventurers still wandering around inside to the entrance, I explained softly. The only time it won't teleport someone to the entrance is if they're dead. The faces that the human made were interesting. They were alien, but so communicative that I immediately knew what they meant. His confusion turned to realization, then sadness, and then, as he turned back to look at Alern, empathy. It was at this moment that I realized that Nash was completely in the wrong about this little creature being a threat. My eyes locked with my brother's. He had seen the empathy on the human's face and knew he had been wrong. His hand dropped from the handle of his axe, for the first time since we left the hospital. The only way the human could be a threat is unintentionally. "Thank you, Alern," Gluren said before turning back to Nick. "Have you ever heard of this beast or anything like it?" "No, chief," the human stammered, shocked by the question. "No need for honorifics." "Call me Gluren please," the chief said gently. "Right, sorry." "No, I haven't, Gluren. Until I woke up yesterday, I hadn't even heard of a dungeon. In my world, monsters aren't real. Neither are orcs, elves, or dwarves. Not even magic. It's just humans and animals." "I'm sorry, I can't be more help," Nick said with a genuine tone. "I understand. Thank you. I'll be wanting to discuss your world more in a bit, but first the topic of what to do with the creature must be addressed," Gluren said. "I don't think we have a team strong enough to beat it," Rurna said. This was quite the revelation from the veteran healer. We had all suspected this to be the case after hearing Alern's recount, but hearing it said aloud by Rurna seemed to set it in stone. There was nobody else in the village who knew the limits of our adventurers better. "Well, we'll have to do something. We can't risk adventurer parties running into the damned thing, and closing the dungeon indefinitely will spell the death of this settlement," the chief said. "What about a barrier?" I asked. "Block off the path that leads to the part of the dungeon with the beast in it. If we use a runic barrier and warn everybody not to mess with it, the beast won't be able to leave the part of the dungeon that it's currently in, and what's to stop it from attacking the crew sent to set up the barrier?" Alern asked hollowly. "It could be that pale, due to living in the darkness for a long time," Nick said. "Which means it's probably got an aversion to light." Light is usually a bad thing in deep darkness. We all looked at the little human with various emotions on our faces. My face held curiosity, Gluern's held amusement, Alern and Renu looked thoughtful. And Nash looked annoyed and angry. I almost laughed when I realized why Nash was upset. He believed the human had spoken out of turn. Yes, you may be right, Renu said at last. The lights leading to the room we found the beast in were all slashed and broken. We all had lights on, though, Alern said. True, but the lights in the hallway were much brighter than our lights. There were times where I nearly forgot we were underground, Renu said excitedly. Then his mood soured and he said, but if that's the case, then we all could have run for it and Kurosaka didn't have to. Hindsight is helpful as long as you don't make it a hindrance, I said. This isn't a case where you should have known better and should be chided into doing better next time. There's no way you could have known. Even I, with all of my learning, have never heard of a beast the likes of which you have described. The pair looked at me with gratitude in their eyes. Okay, then we'll put a barrier up at the broken wall as soon as possible. We'll make it the strongest runic barrier we can make, damn the expense. While the barrier is up, we'll send a missive to the kingdom to make them aware of our troubles and request elite adventurers to vanquish the beast. There's bound to be enough loot to make it worth their while, Gluern said. Does this satisfy your concerns, Alern and Renu? No, Alern replied, falling to his knees. I am shamed, chief. I am meant to be the greatest warrior in this village, yet I fled in terror, leaving my closest friend to die. This turn of events wasn't unexpected. Alern was known for being honorable, and wore heavy plate mail, despite wielding a greatsword for the sole purpose of being a bigger target. He prided himself on taking all of the hits for a party, keeping them safe while they fought. Nash and I locked eyes. He had clenched his teeth again. Then the chief spoke, you are not shamed. You have worked harder than most to be as strong as you are, so it is unlikely that you could have worked any harder or been any stronger by the time your party faced this monstrosity. If the roles had been reversed, and Kurosaka had ran while you fought, you would have died as quickly as Pakin, but chief, no, listen to me Alern. It was a bad matchup. Your strength is great against strength, but that creature surpassed your strength and was many times faster than you. It would have cleaved through your armor in mere moments and then been on Kurosaka and Renu. Kurosaka would have died either way, and the village would be left with one fewer adventurer, Gluern said, leaning back in his seat. Even if you are to be shamed, I cannot think of a worse punishment than having to continue on as an adventurer without your closest comrade. Mourn Kurosaka, comfort his family, heal your mental wounds, and get back to work. Do you hear this judgment? Yes, chief, the mountainous orc said. Good. You both have 3 days off, and then you'll report this situation directly to High Chief Ulermak. Alern, Renu, you two are dismissed. Nash, Yulk, please remain. The 2 over 10s left the chief's chambers, leaving Nash, Nick, and myself standing before Chief Gluern. I always found it awkward when I had to witness Gluern actually be a chief. I much prefer being blissfully ignorant to his wisdom and continuing on as if he were a bumbling fool. No matter, I'm sure his bumbling ways would make themselves evident again soon enough. Now, what to do about you, Nick? Gluern asked. We should find a way to grant him citizenship of the village. Or whatever the equivalent of citizenship is for a village, I said, tapping my chin at the quandary. I know he's shown that he can be useful, but he's not an orc. This is an orc village, not a mixed village. It's part of our mandate. So why? Well, the fact that we found him in the dungeon could pose problems in the future if we don't. Dungeons are first come first served, but not necessarily first registered first served. He's been in the dungeon presumably since before we settled here, since none of us saw him enter, I said, placing my hand on Nick's shoulder to keep him from trying to correct me. If we send him on his merry way, everyone that he runs into will have questions about his origins. Some of those answers may get back to the Kierkegaard, and that could result in an investigation, which would result in our claim being temporarily revoked. Or even permanently revoked if it finds in favor of the human. I see, Gluren said, narrowing his eyes as if to try to see through my bullshit. If he were part of the village, then our claim couldn't be revoked. His claim on the dungeon would merge with ours. Would that be satisfactory to you, human? Gluren asked. Why yes, Nick said as I squeezed his shoulder pointedly. Okay. Now the problem is, how do we go about doing this? I'm certain His Majesty won't approve of us just adding him to our roster. Adoption. High Chief Ullermac can't contest an adoption. Nash said. I'm sure Mom wouldn't mind. What do you think, Yolk? I was shocked at the suggestion. It was surprising enough that Nash was suggesting that the human be our brother, but the actual cleverness behind the scheme was even more surprising. He was correct, the High Chief can't contest an adoption. He was also correct that Mother would likely go for the scheme. She had a big heart and loved non-orc company. I couldn't help but grin at how conniving my brother was being. I'm sure she wouldn't mind at all. That's a great idea, actually, I replied. That would also settle the matter of where to keep him. We just clean out a room for him. I've been meaning to move my laboratory to the alchemists anyway. Good, then it's settled. We'll talk to Mom and get the human moved in, Nash replied while turning to Nick. Then he asked in a dangerous tone, unless the human has an objection, and no, I don't. Thank you, Nick said. All right, sounds good. Nick will have to remain in the hospital until Yilda makes the adoption official, though, which means you're still on guard duty, Gluren said with a chuckle. If I could have a moment, Chief? I asked. Sure. Nick, Nash, you're dismissed. My brother looked at me with curiosity, before deciding that he'd rather not know why I wanted to spend more time with the chief. Nick and Nash turned and left, leaving Gluren and I alone. I'd been wanting to have this conversation for quite some time, and I had been thinking about the best way to broach the subject. Gluren opened his mouth to speak, but I interrupted him. I'd like to teach the human how to use magic.